Good evening. Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm Andre Morgan, and I have the privilege of serving Beverly Public Schools. Thank you for being a part of tonight's conversation. For some, community means a group of people sharing common social characteristics, physical space, ideas, beliefs, and activities. For others, communities cannot exist unless people come together and care for each other and feel connected to one another. And this nuance reminds us that we can have things in common and be in the same space, but still feel isolated and even afraid of one another. By considering each other's lives and experiences and even perspectives, this allows a community to not only be what we have in common, but to value our differences as well. We know that in the pursuit of racial equity, individual conversations are the beginning. They're not the final stop. And this is considered to be a journey. Conversations can help us better understand individual bias. It can also help us better understand racism, as well as consider how racism is a part of our system and institutions. So we're having this community conversation event because we want to respond to the increased demand and desire to have conversations in this arena. Our hope is that these conversations will be one step in all of our processes and our growth and our development, and that we will be able to use the insights gained from the conversations this evening and even beyond to determine our next steps individually and collectively as a community. Our intention with having this community conversation this evening is to focus on three areas. One, the intersectionality of race equity work and being an anti-racist. Two, a discussion and explanation around critical race theory. And three, the occurrence at our recent September 8th school committee meeting. At this point, I want to introduce my friend and colleague, Abu Tapin, who serves as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the City of Beverly, who's going to further our conversation this evening.
I'm not as tall as Andre, so I have to lower this. Thank you all very much for joining us tonight for this very important conversation. Before I give a quick word about what we're going to discuss tonight, I want us to define some terms. So when we're having this discussion, we can all have some common understanding and common ground about what terms we're using and why we're using those terms, what those terms mean. And I think this will help us better understand the scope and as part of our discussion tonight. Anti-racism. Anti-racism is the work of actively opposing racism by advocating for changes in political, economic, and social life. Anti-racism tends to be an individualized approach and set up in opposition to individual racist behaviors and impacts. Anti-racist. An anti-racist is someone who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressions, expressing anti-racist ideas. This includes the expression of ideas that racial groups are equals and do not need developing and supporting policies that reduce racial equity. Critical race theory. Critical race theory considers many of the same issues that conventional civil rights and ethnic studies take up, but place them in a broader perspective that includes economics, history, and even feelings and the unconscious. Unlike traditional civil rights, which embraces incrementalism and step-by-step progress, critical race theory questions the very foundations of liberal order, including equity theory, legal reasoning, enlightenment, rationalism, and principles of constitutional law. Finally, when we talk about racial equity is the condition that would have been achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicted how one fares. This includes the elimination of policies, practices, attitudes, and messages that reinforce differential outcomes by race or that fail to eliminate them. When we talk about being anti-racist or racial justice, what does that mean to be intentional? Many current inequities are sustained by historical legacies and structures and systems that repeat patterns of exclusion. Institutions and structures have continued to create and perpetuate inequities despite the lack of explicit intention. Without intentional intervention, institutions and structures will continue to perpetuate racial inequities. This will lead us to the beginning of our questioning for our panel and our discussion tonight. Quick note, as we begin our discussion, we're going to reserve questions for the end. So if you guys have questions, please write them down. For those of you joining us at home, you'll be able to submit your questions with the chat function, and we will try to get to as many questions as we possibly can at the end of the discussion. Again, we're talking about the intentionality of race equity work and being anti-racist. Question 1. In order to eliminate racial inequities in our communities, do you think developing a collective impact approach firmly grounded in inclusion and equity is necessary? When we talk about collective impact, we're talking, simply put, combining our communities together, bringing our folks together as a collective approach so that it's not just people of color solving the problem or addressing the issues, but it's all of us solving the problem and addressing the issues. Panelists. Councilor Rotundo, please.
Thank you, Abu. This is something that when the George Floyd incident happened over a year ago, for me, it was a way of really digging into the community and getting people together to have a one-on-one conversation, which we started at one point. It was small groups and many different groups. It was a way of having conversations about ignorance on our part, my part especially. I was the first one to admit I'm ignorant to a lot of the systematic racism. And sometimes it might be a one-on-one conversation or a community group conversation, but we do have to have this sometimes conversation that can be challenging to have. So it's definitely, we're moving in the right direction with it. I feel that, to continue the conversation is a necessity.
Jocelyn?
Thanks, Abu. I think that it is necessary. I think that bringing people together in a structured way to bring about change, like we're doing right now, ensures that we're all on the same page about what's happening and that we work together to agree on how to move forward.
Councilor Copeland.
Yes, thank you, Abu, and thank you to the two panelists that spoke before. I definitely agree with this. One thing I clarify is that we have to understand what inclusion and equity means. I think we've had inclusion before. And I think even Dr. King spoke about it. He said, I feel as though I've led my people into a burning house. Because if you have inclusion without equity, and I put equity this way, you might have a great and amazing friend, and they let you rent or stay at a place in their home. But it's their home. No matter how great of a friend they are, eventually they're going to get tired of you and say, you got to go. But if you have equity in that home, now you have potentially equal partnership. You have a say so that you both can work together towards what you're trying to achieve. So if they want to change anything, they have to come to you, talk to you about it. If you want to change anything, you have to come to them about it. So now you really have what you're talking about there, that collective impact. But you have to have not just the inclusion, but also the equity to go along with that. Thank you.
Dr. Georgia.
Yes, I appreciate your definition when you talk about bringing all of us together in the work. And I think, at least from the school's perspective, we had a long conversation as we brought on Dr. Morgan as the Director of Opportunity, Access, and Equity. And the real point was this: we weren't bringing him in to do the work for us. We were bringing him in to help us do the work, because really the work is on our shoulders if in fact we're going to make any progress with our schools. So, I think that collective impact, I think that's a small example of how it looks, but I think as a larger community we have to feel the same way. We have to be looking inward to ourselves and working together to kind of make sure that as we move forward together. So.
Mr. Johnson, please.
Thank you, Dr. Chirotak, and thank you so much, Abu, and to the other panelists. I just want to also say that we're all learning together, and I always say that together we can, and I think that this collective impact is about keeping everyone at the table, and just know that we are all working hard, and no matter where you are in the learning curve, we're all working together, and that's okay.
Any thoughts from the panel?
So thanks, everybody. I just have a final point about, the collective impact portion. I think the other piece that we have to acknowledge is there is a lot of fear around what the intentions may be or what the information and content is going to be about. And part of the collective impact is that it allows for transparency for everyone. I think when you're having these conversations in public and transparently, people can better understand the motives, intentions, and the desired outcomes. And I think that's an important part of moving it together as a community.
Thank you very much. Before we move to the next question, what we did not do was introduce you all. Could you please go down the line and introduce yourselves to our audience, please, starting with Dr. Rocha.
Yes, hi, I'm Dr. Sue Chirocha. I'm the superintendent of schools here in Beverly.
Hi, I'm John Mulady. I represent Ward 4 in the school committee, and I'm also a parent to 2 children at Hannah Elementary School.
My name is Dr. Kanan McKenzie, and I am Ward 2 school committee representative, and also have a child at the high school.
Hi, I'm Julie Flowers. I'm one of the large city councilors, which is a fancy way of saying citywide, represent the whole city, and I have a 5th grader here at Beverly Middle School.
Yes, my name's Dominic Copeland. I'm the Ward 6 City Councilor, so the farms in Centerville. I also have 4 amazing boys and a wonderful wife. I have currently 1 son that's at the high school playing football and basketball. Doing not too bad of a job.
I'm Todd Rotundo, Ward Councilor for Ward 1. I have 2 children, one who's graduated from Beverly High School, who's herself now teaching, and I have a 14-year-old who started the Essex Tech.
Thank you, Councilor Rotundo. I'm Keisha Johnson. I'm the chair of the Human Rights Committee, and I'm also a mother of 2, one who actually goes to this beautiful middle school here. Thank you.
My name is Jocelyn Ruel-Kursker. I'm the Chief of Staff to Mayor Cahill. I also have a daughter who's going to the Tech first year this year, and I've been a city employee for about 20 years.
All right, now we're good. Question 2 for you folks. Considering the historical inequitable legacies and structures that persist, where does the importance of intentional intervention regarding policies or practices play a role in how we can break the chain of racial inequities?
Thank you, Abu. At the city level, it will help to ensure that people of color have opportunities and are represented in various departments and at various levels of government. For example, as you know, we're trying to be more intentional in our inclusion of people of color in our hiring processes. Abu has helped us to broaden our search for candidates and connected us with resources that we didn't know about. Beverly's contributed to the North Shore Diversity Catalog, and Abu's hosted gatherings of local business owners of color. These gatherings connected business owners with city services, with each other, and helped us to kind of understand who we're communicating with before we kind of start to think about how we're communicating with people. The city is also engaged in a racial equity audit, but that is complete will be our guide for intentional intervention at all levels of government.
Thank you, Jocelyn. I know we all want to be safe, but when you speak, if you wouldn't mind lowering your mask, because I think we have a little bit of difficulty folks hearing. So when each of you speak, if you could just lower your mask at the moment.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Anybody else have a response or want to chime in on that question? Julie?
Thank you very much, Abu. I think Jocelyn gave a really good accounting of some of the intentional practices that the city is beginning to put in place. I was thinking about your question a little broadly, I think, and I wanted to just offer a reflection. I've been thinking about this and thinking about when historical inequities exist and part of our legacy, part of the structure of our country and our systems. And I think, thinking about why do we need them to be intentional to break those practices? And I've been thinking about something we understand, I think, as people in our everyday lives is how hard it is when we're trying to break a habit and create a new way of doing things. And so I think if we apply that way of thinking to looking together at society, our schools, our city, I think that can help us think about why intentionality is so important. Because for hundreds of years, we've had systems in place that privilege some of us at the expense of our friends and neighbors of color. And to disrupt what's basically, I would say, become a habit for our collective society, we really need to be intentional about thinking about how we go about the way we organize everything from the way we teach and talk in our schools, which there's already great happening, to the way that we work together in our city, as Jocelyn was talking about, to the way that we as individuals interact. And so I've just been thinking about how hard it can be for individuals even to break our own personal habits. And that's what we really want to be talking about here, and it's real intentionality to make that happen. So coming back to your original comment about anti-racism, I think a lot about, for myself, just being non-racist isn't sufficient to break a pattern. It really takes active work.
Dominic.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Well, I look at it this way. It's like construction. If you go to tear down a house because you need to make some changes or renovate, we see it on TV, people that go without a plan and it doesn't work out so well. So they have to call in professionals to come help because they destroyed their house. So I have to be intentional about the things that you're trying to accomplish in life, no matter what it is. If you're trying to redo your kitchen, but you never turn off the water, you don't turn off the electricity, it becomes a hazard, it becomes a danger. You can't change those things. But also when you go to rebuild it, you have to be intentional. You have plans. You have professionals that come in that work with you to establish exactly what you want to accomplish, how and why. So with something like this social contract that's even more complicated, we have to be very intentional about what you're trying to accomplish. And I give a quick example. When I was a football coach, I never went to a game without intentionally working on a game plan, instituting the game plan, working through the game plan daily. Sometimes it went better than others, but at the same time, if we didn't have that game plan, I'd have a bunch of teachers sitting around doing who knows what, hurting themselves and hurting others. And sometimes socially, it seems like that's what we're doing. We have good intentions, but we're not intentional about it. We're focused. We come together like we were talking about before with the collective impact. We don't come together, as a team, as a city, as a community to determine how we want to move forward with these things. Thank you.
Kanan, did you? Okay. John, please.
Sure. So I like this question. It can be a little bit overwhelming in the grand scheme of trying to get the city's problems, but also society's larger problems. So what I try to tell myself is like we can only control what we can't control. And in a very imperfect world, for those of us who have volunteered for the city or serve in city government, we try to make it a little bit more perfect. And I think for everybody else, it's just recognizing that everybody in this room and watching is a different state in their journey, and to recognize that my comfort level with this conversation might be different from somebody else. So that this is a good opportunity for all of us to reach out to people maybe outside of normal social circles and try to engage and meet them at their comfort level. And I know there are people here in the audience right now looking at them, and I know them, I've had those conversations with them, and they've helped me in my journey. Just continue to have those conversations, because it's very easy for us to just kind of shut up the noise, but we're also ignoring people that we should be trying to engage with, haven't engaged with for a while.
Any other thoughts? I'll just quickly add that the intentional work is one of the methodical process, because we're talking about generational racism. And so that's not changed overnight or quickly. Some are looking to do that. Like, this is kind of the flavor of the month to do DEI work. But if we're looking to do long-lasting sustained change, and we're challenging a system that's been in place for generations, that takes time and intent. So we must continue that process methodically, step by step. No other thoughts on that particular question? We'll move to the next one. How do you respond to someone who questions why we're intentionally creating programs or policies to dismantle racial inequities? Isn't this reverse racism? No one wants to take that one? Canan, please.
All right, I think I answer that question once a week. Hopefully I'll be very concise. But yeah, I think that, first of all, I see any work around being humane and kind to each other to be our own self-work. And so I feel as though this is work that benefits everyone. We all agree, even in kindergarten, we don't want our children to be hateful. We don't want them to be intolerant. We don't want them to be unkind. And then we give ourselves permission to do it if we get older for some reason, right? So this is all about our own work, first and foremost. I tell teachers who I work with that the personal is the professional. There's no way to distinguish who you're going to be in your private life from the way you interact with young people. So you're modeling who you're going to be in the world to that, and therefore creating an environment that will either help them flourish or will be harmful. I make the assumption that people who work with people love them and want the best for them until they prove otherwise. But sometimes they don't understand the environment that they are creating, even if it means having super low expectations because you're so worried about these young people. So we have to understand on our side, because of the bedrock of equity that it was built on, that we can unconsciously or consciously decide that some people will never make it. I used to have this economist I worked with tell me, and he meant to be as progressive and welcoming as he wanted to be, and he'd say, black people are just never going to succeed in the same way, so I don't know why you're trying for that. The system was not built for you to be successful, and you won't ever achieve parity. And so, given the head start hundreds of years of assuring that particular groups were more successful than others, we cannot expect overnight there will be equity. That is unrealistic. However, each generation of young people, we have to be able to examine the DNA of our country. And I tell people, when we have these DNA kits we send for, not me, I don't want to do that. We have these DNA kits sent away for, right? We do it partially because, we're curious about where we are from in the world. We're curious about things like, what are the medical issues we need to worry about? Maybe who we shouldn't marry, I don't know. But, my better half is very well. We also think about what we might be able to prevent, right? We want to find out important things. If your geneticist does a study of your family because there's an illness, there's an intention. But if you go in there and gene edit and say, well, take out Uncle Roy because I don't like him, they're missing information, right? Your DNA code is not complete. You have to look at the bad, ugly, and different and ill in your strand to be able to be healthy. So part of the point of this in terms of looking at those historical structures is to say, where were we unhealthy? Were we intentionally doing the wrong things that make us sick at this point? But if we're looking at it as collective wellness, then it's not excluding anyone. We all want to be well, right? But we cannot do that by taking out the family members in the gene pool who we're not so proud of, because they all have collectively fed where we are today. So whenever people say, why do we need to talk about what happened? I'm not a racist, or these things are not such. You have benefited by osmosis from a system that was designed to privilege certain people. So even if you in your heart are just blessed and don't want to do that, you could still unconsciously be perpetuating that. So that is why we all have to be about the business of understanding where those practices came into play, and then we have to design programs to therefore educate ourselves. It's inertia. There's never a reason to look at the ugly things. So we have to, as we pointed out before, be intentional about that, whether that's programming, whether that's about having our amazing people here who do this work for the city. But every time I'm asked that question, we talk about you can't collectively edit your history and expect to be in a place of wellness as a society. So it's not about shaming or blaming or dismissing. It's about having an accurate accounting so that we could do the work in a way that is really holistic and, frankly, good for all of us in the long run. My short answer.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that question? Todd?
I may not be able to be as articulate and say as well as you did, but for me, when reading this question, systematic racism, how is it created? It's the system that we've lived in since the creation of our country. Our country was created by white aristocratic men. So the Constitution and all our laws were created that way and over time. So it's trying to erase a slate in our head of how we live, how our laws are created. And so for me, that's how I explain to people is, just let's think back in time and how this country was created. It was created by the white men. And, women's suffrage 1920, the civil rights in the 60s. So that's, to me, for me, it seems a little simpler to understand and to grasp my head around it when I explain to people how I think that, the things that are going on currently. So, thank you.
Keisha.
Thank you so much, Dr. McKenzie and Councilor Rotundo. I just wanted to say that because we've been doing things a certain way for a long time doesn't mean that it's the right way to do things. And that's okay too. And, I wasn't around when there was smoking allowed in restaurants and children didn't wear seatbelts, but there was a time when we did things in a way that seemed okay because that's all we knew. But now we know better. And we're learning, and so we'll do better.
Thank you. I think one of the things I was thinking about this, Kanyan, as you were talking, and thinking about sometimes the way that we approach any kind of a problem or any kind of an issue, we can choose between having sort of a scarcity mindset or an abundance mindset. And I was thinking, as you talked about collective wellness, kind of melding together my thinking with what you were talking about, because sometimes I think some resistance to our having these conversations or doing this work comes from a place of fear that somehow equity is about a zero-sum game. And so if people who have share with people who have been systematically kept from having, then there won't be enough. And somehow, if you get more than I get less, and somehow it's this zero-sum game. And I think that's such a scarcity mindset. So I like to think about it in terms of abundance, that it's not a zero-sum game, that we're really talking about expanding and sharing and drawing more people in. And so that's why I really liked what you said about collective wellness. I feel like that resonates really for me, that it's really about sharing more broadly and benefiting the whole, not that there's loss or that there's this fear that there will be loss, for people like me whom the system has privileged, if somehow my friends and neighbors of color are allowed to experience, to share in what the system has privileged me with. So that's one of the things I was thinking about is in terms of responding, thinking about where some of the fear or resistance might be, and talking about this as it's not a zero-sum game. It's not that if other people are invited in, then suddenly someone like me is invited out. It's really about giving up the systemic privilege that I've had for hundreds of years. Yeah.
John, please.
Thank you. I found in my own experiences, having some conversations with people in my life and even some of my family members, that there were some cases where people felt almost like this idea of systemic racism was taking away their accomplishments, and they would say, well, I didn't get a handout, or I didn't have this. and to try to have a conversation saying, we're not talking about that you were given these advantages. I'm not trying to undermine, the success you've had in school or in your job, but just trying to emphasize that for some people, this life has been a lot harder and more challenging, and trying to break down the conversation so it's less about feeling a sense of being personally attacked or trying to sense of feel guilty, like, well, my family was responsible for this. We didn't arrive to this country until 19, blah, blah, blah. So that's why I feel like, like you said earlier, it's really digging down, having those conversations, because oftentimes when we're approached with information that we don't necessarily want to hear, our first reactions can be, I'm okay, I don't need that. And then we can be very dismissive. But to try to break it down for individuals where they're not trying to feel guilty, we're not trying to make you feel ashamed for being white, but just to get a better understanding that this is the world that we're in. We've inherited it and we have benefited from it, whether or not it may not seem that way based on your own personal experiences.
Any other thoughts? John, that leads us perfectly into our next question. Where do you see prejudices or inequities being played out in our own settings, and how might we act with intent to help disrupt those prejudices or inequities? In our own circles, people we know. Dr. Trojan.
So I think just in start, I think it's kind of a combination answer to the three questions in a row. But you mentioned earlier perpetuating some of the same practices and policies that we have. And I think in the schools, one of the things that we're working really hard on doing is revisiting some of those structures that are in place that might unintentionally put some people at a disadvantage. So taking a look at those policies. And an example for us is that we're working in particular looking at enrollment in advanced coursework, right? So there's data that says that those students that are enrolled in advanced coursework have better outcomes. And so I think how do we do that? Looking at the practices, how do we choose? What's that course selection? What are some of the policies that lead to that? And I think it's sometimes taking some of those small steps and breaking down some of the structures that we have in place that will allow us to sort of figure it out and move on and generalize it to other situations. So that was just...
John, please.
I think we're probably going to end up just going down with this question. I do want to give her a shout out, but Ms. Gabrielle Montevecchi, I'm going to paraphrase what you told your teachers, but it was looking at the classroom libraries that we have. And I think you said something like, if there are more books about animals than there are people of color, you need to re-examine your libraries. And little steps like that, what are the books that we're having our kids read? And we've been doing this curriculum audit, and we're doing these audits in the schools. And those are examples of circumstances that we can't control. We can't control what TV shows our children watch. We can't control what toys our kids are playing with. We can't control who the kids' role models are trying to be. And just take it from there.
Okay. John just said we're going to go.
Sorry.
I'm just going with it. Yeah, so in terms of our own settings, I mean, certainly I think that one of the challenges we're going to get to down the road here is that there are challenges for educators who want to really talk about these issues. And I think depending on where they are politically, could be more challenging for some than others. And I think that's a sad challenge they're dealing with. As somebody who provides professional development, not only in this area, but this is one of the areas, sometimes it is challenging to help them to understand how to articulate the need for this information. And I'm learning about more educators who are feeling censored in a way. Because when we teach history, for example, or social studies, and we want to include the voice of indigenous peoples or people of color, and we see it as a part of a holistic educational program, then it seems to be the way you'd want to go about teaching history, but now they're afraid to use words that have anything to do with racialized histories. But to try to remove race from history would mean that it's not actually history. And so there's this real challenge right now, I think, with being comprehensive about teaching history, while at the same time I think educators are feeling very, frustrated about what is appropriate and what's not appropriate, what's age appropriate, and really looking for more guidance, I think, on the best approach for children, but at the same time being mindful of concerns parents may have, or whether information they're sharing is appropriate for that age and for that group of students. And so I think that is definitely an ongoing challenge that I hear a lot about.
Are we actually doing this?
No, you don't have to. If you have a thought, please chime in.
Well, I do, but for part of my answer, I want to switch my name tag to wear my other hat. Is that okay? I want to be Reverend Julie Flowers for a minute. Because thinking about my own settings, for a large portion of my day, in addition to being a city councilor, I am a minister at First Baptist Church, and I think about a minister friend of mine one time pointed out that, well, he said 11 o'clock on Sunday. I think most churches now have moved their worship time to keep up with families and to be earlier, but it's one of the most segregated. The worship hour is one of the most segregated hours in America, and if you think about how still segregated our society is in many ways and areas, I think that's a strong indictment, I think, of church, especially white church, I guess I'll say. So I've been thinking about what are the reasons for that, and I think there's many, but one I think has to do with my crossover answer, so I'll switch my name at the right time, which is what are the ways that traditions, and not necessarily traditions, I think there's sort of traditions that exist in sort of this broad way, and then there's like the little t traditions that are the systems that we've created. And so within a church, for example, there are all of these sort of unspoken, unknown, if you're from outside the community, traditions that can feel very unwelcoming. And so I think about that for my role at the church is, what are the ways that people who are not familiar with this community are being made to feel welcomed or included? And I think this plays into the ways that for the white church, there's been privilege and access and money and all kinds of reasons why those traditions have gotten built in a certain way that don't necessarily feel inclusive or welcoming to people who are coming from different backgrounds, different traditions, different faith traditions themselves. And now I'm going to switch to say that I think about that from in city government, and when you think about even who runs for office and who's able to easily sort of tap into all of these networks and ways that you can find support, organize people, tap into people who might be big donors. I think there's privilege that's already sort of built in for white candidates who have sort of been part of this inside the system, and then perpetuates some real inequity in terms of who we see representing us. And so I think that's sort of my crossover answer, that sometimes the traditions and the systems that we build, even without knowing we've done it, can be part of what keeps people on the outside and does not allow people to step in or to be part of something.
All right. I'm up to bat.
It's your turn.
Yeah, hopefully the Red Sox are doing good too. So with me with this and the questions that we answered before, the one directly before it, I look at it this way. I'm from Pennsylvania. It's a different atmosphere there. So I was raised around, white supremacists, skinheads, and so forth. I've seen the gamut. I've seen our family targeted and all the other things that we had to go through. So I've seen the very human side of it all and trying to rise up and work through that. And I'll say the one thing, for me, one of my favorite TV shows growing up was The Dukes of Hazzard. So you got the General Lee, and then you got the good old boys running around, and they're evading all the, everyone trying to get them and everything else. They're rebels, and you're young, you're like, I'm a rebel too, so you love it. It's part of growing up, part of what you believe in. So I like to say that we're all caught in the matrix, and we can't see truly the systems and structures that are really behind moving things. So even though I watched the Dukes of Hazzard and I was like, oh, the General Lee, that's the coolest car ever, I didn't understand the true meaning behind that. But once you start to intentionally break that down, doesn't mean that I don't still love the concept of Dukes of Hazzard and what it's about. It just means now understand a little bit better some of the things behind that. I don't support necessarily, the flag they had on there or the General Lee and all that stuff. I support the spirit that they were trying to embody. Of being that rebel and standing up for some of the things that you believe in, because I believe that we all share that in common. Trying to stand up for what we believe in, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. But to me, I've always said, say for example, when I'm coaching a kid, and you have those kids that are hard-headed, and they're problems and they're trouble, and those are the ones that you don't really want to deal with. I was like, those are the kids that I love because they have something that you can't teach. You just have to be able to direct that. You just have to be able to harness that. And if they can harness that towards a positive direction, you can do anything now. But they have to have that basis. So when I look at it, the structures that we're dealing with and people, if they begin to ask those questions, to me, just them asking that question is an opportunity to make a difference. And if they can get to know you, who you are, and what you stand for, and what you're about, now you can start to break down some of those barriers and start to walk together. Because outside of getting to the human element of it, it's going to be hard for them to see the matrix. It's going to be hard for them to understand why that flag on the General Lee, why that's violating to some other people, why other people don't believe in that. But also you have to understand why they might believe in that, why they might support that, because they don't have a full understanding of what it truly means. So if you can come together on that human level and have those discussions, that's when you can really start to change things and break down barriers and start to come together and understand each other as human beings, brother to brother, sister to sister. And right now in our society, we're having a real problem doing that. And as fearful as it might be, that's the point that we have to get to, where we can be vulnerable as human beings, because that's how we're meant to be. And until we get there, we just want to keep dividing ourselves. But, more important to me, before we get to some of the things here, is that human element of it. And then we can bring these things into the table.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I know because we're kind of already coming close to our hour, we want to make sure we have time for questions, but we do want to have this next discussion about critical race theory, and which is a very charged topic across the country. And so Dr. Morgan is going to come and give us a little quick breakdown and understanding of what critical race theory is and what it is not. And we'll hear from a few members of our panel on the subject. Thank you.
Many thanks, Abu. I want to take an opportunity to talk about critical race theory because it's a hot button topic right now. And it's a topic that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it gets conflated and misperceived and misunderstood. So I want to take just a couple of minutes to give some context about it. I'm going to pivot to our panelists for a couple of responses, and then we're going to open up the floor for questions. If you have a question about anything that you've heard so far, about anything that you're getting ready to hear, and you're physically here in this space, we're going to ask you to gravitate to the microphone in the far left aisle, your right, your left in some cases. And then we also have several folks who have joined us virtually, and I can imagine that there are some questions that will come out of the chat as well. But critical race theory is an academic concept that is more than 40 years old. It emerged in the late 1970s and as early as 1980s. And the core idea is that race is a social construct and that racism is not merely the product of individual bias or prejudice, but also something embedded in legal systems and policies in our society. So why are we addressing this tonight? Because this bothered some members of our community. And I'll be the first to say that we've gotten a number of correspondence, not always the most positive, about why we're standing up CRT in schools. And so we felt it important to really address that straight on. And so rather than just make a statement, allow me to illustrate what CRT really is. In the 1930s, government officials drew lines around areas deemed poor financial risk, often explicitly due to the racial composition of residents. Banks subsequently refused to offer mortgages to people of color in those areas. We know that as redlining. And today, those same patterns of discrimination live on through race-blind policies, like single-family zoning that prevents the building of affordable housing in advantaged majority white neighborhoods and thus deadlocks racial desegregation efforts. We have not and do not teach that in Beverly Public Schools. And can I share why? Number one, teaching the concepts and even using the curriculum materials or other methods are not readily available to pre-K through 12 teachers. And then much of the scholarship on CRT is written in such academic language or published in journals that is not accessible by pre-K through 12 teachers. And what has become really unfortunate in this discussion around CRT is that the terms critical race theory is now cited as the basis for anything that you do involving diversity and inclusion efforts, regardless of how much it's actually informed programs. Now, what we support in Beverly Public Schools is culturally responsive teaching that also has the same acronym, CRT, and it's used interchangeably with critical race theory. Culturally responsive teaching is a goal of many public school districts across the U.S. Now, let me tell you what it is. It emerged in the 1990s, and it is a teaching approach that seeks to affirm students' ethnic and racial backgrounds and is intellectually rigorous. Culturally responsive teaching supports the goal of education, and it gives every student what he, she, and they need to be successful in school and in subsequent life. And one of the objectives of culturally responsive teaching that we trust will stand is providing all students, let me just share that word again, all students with access to advanced coursework. And so what I'd like to do is talk about culturally responsive teaching in the schools and how we're standing it up. And so Dr. Chirocek, if you will allow me to bring you into the conversation to talk a little more about that, and then I'll open it up to the full panel.
Thank you. So culturally responsive teaching is something that we're actively working with our teachers in our schools and our professional development, working to kind of give them the tools that they need within the classroom. It works nicely with some of the other pedagogies that we have in place, including universal design for learning. It matches up with some of the SEL, social emotional learning work that we're doing in our classrooms. It's research-based. It's an intentional approach. It connects student cultures, languages, and life experiences to what they learn. And really, it has a lot of benefits. The benefits for culturally responsive teaching and in culturally responsive classrooms is that it raises the expectations for all students. It's an asset-based approach. In other words, we take a look and we work from the strengths that all students bring to the classroom and build upon those. It helps our schools meet students' needs, particularly needs of underserved groups of students in our classrooms. Students come to the classroom in a variety of different places, and this allows teachers in the classroom to kind of make sure that they're working to meet the needs of all the students that sit in front of them. It builds cultural competence, not just on a teacher's part, but on our students' part. So when you participate in a classroom that's taught, that's culturally aware, it increases the competence of all of the students that are in the classroom. And I think we talked a little bit earlier about collective impact and what that would mean, and I think that's an important part. And then I think finally, and most importantly for me, it really, all of the students in a classroom that's taught with culturally responsive teaching really feel valued and empowered, because what it works on is building trust and building relationships within the classroom with teachers and students and amongst each other. So, we've done a lot of work. Zaretta Hammond has a book out that we've done as a district-wide read. We've done professional development on this, and it's a really important piece of what we think is going to help move us forward in Beverly.
Many thanks. I want to open up for one more panel remark, if anyone has a remark. And for those of you in the audience that have a question, I'm going to ask that you start making your way to the microphone. And Judy, if you will, if there are questions in the chat, after we finish this last panel, I see you shaking your head, we'll take one of those questions as well. Other comments from the panel? All right. Are there any questions from the audience? And what we will do in the interest of time, after the first question is asked or answered, and to our question askers, if you will, if you're directing your question to one of the panel members, please state that. If it's an open question, we'll take one response, and then we'll go to a question, Judy, from our chat.
Good evening. My name is Diana Needhammer. I'm a resident here of Beverly. I've been thinking a lot about these issues lately. I've spoken with a number of the panelists here, and I thank you very much for the time. It's more of a comment than a question that I have to share tonight. I was very moved by Dominic Copeland's words about equity versus inclusion, and Kaja Johnson's words about how we're all learning. With those thoughts in mind, I've been thinking about the work ahead and recent incidents, and thinking about how we could point to, or I could point to, one racist statement and disagree, and call that person, call their actions racist. I could declare that I'm opposed to racism, and that these thoughts are fine, but that they won't change anything. And I'm really hoping for some change. So I'm thinking that we need to look at how we ourselves and our systems and our government are contributing to racism, and especially the white people in our government and in our systems and ourselves. I'm asking everyone to review and review again your policies, and I'm urging us to ask ourselves every time we meet racism what we can change in ourselves or our world to prevent it from happening again. And I want to say, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Thank you for your dedication and commitment to anti-racism, and thank you for this event here tonight.
Thank you for your comment. Now we'll take a question from the chat.
There's one question here, Andre, that someone would like to hear if there's a targeted effort to hire people of color in the classroom.
Judy, if you will repeat that question for me, and if you can go a little louder into the microphone.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Someone is asking if there is a targeted effort to hire people of color in the classroom.
There are efforts to diversify our workforce. And, you know, when we talk about recruiting, we can't talk about recruiting without retention. And so, yes, we want to bring a diverse workforce, but we also want to bring the best workforce in the Beverly. And so I think that needs to be brought out to the forefront, that it's not about hiring because of race. It's considering race when you're also considering the person that has the best attributes to do the best job that's going to serve all of our students here in the district. All right, next question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Jones. I'm on the Human Rights Committee, along with others here. So thank you so much. This is a wonderful panel. And thank you for all the work you all do to challenge us to be a better Beverly. My question is a little bit, I wanted to say that a few years ago, a lot of us witnessed a school committee meeting where I think school committee members demonstrated that they were hearing from families and students and really listening to them, and declared Beverly a sanctuary school district. And it was one of the most proud meetings I've ever attended, and I was kind of wishing that I'd had my child there. And then something sort of terrible happened with some community comment, and it became the last meeting I would ever have wanted my child to be at. And so in thinking about the incidents in the meeting, the hurtful meeting last month, I guess I went back to my own actions after that sanctuary schools meeting, and I thought a lot about what I could have done differently or better, and what I would have done differently if I had been sitting there with my child, and why it would matter if I were there with my child, and why didn't I take different steps then. So I guess what I'm asking is, what is in place, or what did we learn from that school committee meeting that we carried into this most recent school committee meeting, and that was put into place to ensure that our colleagues, especially colleagues of color, when we're talking about, you know, hoping for more representation in the classroom, what are we doing to ensure the safety, the feeling of safety and the trust and the types of things that we say we're building in our classrooms, which I totally believe that we're doing a wonderful job doing that. What are we doing with our colleagues to ensure that when something like that happens in the classroom or in a city meeting, we have so many different committees and boards, that has there been learning or a retreat to kind of discuss what happened and to say what can we do differently, and can there be policy put into place so that we know how to react? And I ask myself the same questions if something comes up in the classroom with my own child, and I'm grateful. I know a lot of people are working on that, and because relationships are built, it may be handled differently. So did that question come through? Kind of what did we learn from that first meeting, and what actionable steps or concrete things can we say we've put into place or are hoping to put into place to make sure we can keep each other safe and feeling safe so that we can do the best work we can together?
So I'm going to ask for one response from our panel in the interest of time. Is there anyone who wants to address that question?
Well, so yeah, Leah, thank you for raising that issue. In the interest of time, we didn't get to that, but we intended to. Just so you know, we were not going to skirt the issue, but we also are mindful of time. I can't speak to district policy per se. That's Dr. Trochik's wheelhouse. But what I will say is that to Dr. Morgan's earlier point, recruitment also includes thinking about retention, and issues of retention have to do with people feeling safe and welcomed. And I have to say that despite the display that occurred on the 8th, the community response has been overwhelmingly positive. And so while we need to know that there are persons for whom this is still an issue that they feel very visceral about and they're willing to be confrontational about, that I think the majority of people have shown, at least to me directly and perhaps in other ways, that it is not to be tolerated. And so I think for me, it's also a good reminder that the squeaky wheel may get the attention, but that doesn't speak to the entire house. And so I think that there are many efforts, including Dr. Morgan has not pointed this out tonight, but I'll just give him a shout out for establishing the North Shore Educators of Color consortium that exists. So that's something that he is facilitating, but there are efforts in place to acknowledge that there is an affinity necessary for that safety to be in place. I think that as a city and as colleagues on school committee and city government, that individuals, I know you have, others have reached out and been very vocal and supportive. And although it doesn't seem like a big P policy thing to do, those acts of kindness are critical and important to me, and I'm sure collectively, to people who want to know that others care, notice, and are aware and are willing to say or do something. So I think that's really important, and I think the community should be proud of that. I trust and know that there are policies in place to affirm that everyone is welcomed. We cannot always prevent people from ignoring that or flouting that. But I think we have taken very proactive steps in Beverly. We have become a thought leader in the region. We have become a place where people see modeling of some of the steps we've taken in the school with Dr. Morgan, with Abu, with the work we're doing around our equity audit. If you have not looked at the equity audit, please, it's available online as a public document. So we are doing a lot of things, but we have to keep having these community conversations so that we can continue to educate ourselves collectively on why this is necessary. And hopefully those kinds of reactions that we see in our public spaces will lead to more positive changes and not help, essentially not have us believe that progress isn't being made, because I think it is. But I think we need to continue to have the conversation. And we also want those people who are not on board to feel like they can express themselves so that we can get to the bottom of what the fear is and what the resistance is. And so I hope that folks who are online, who are in this room, who feel like maybe they have thoughts that aren't welcomed in the public space, find a way to safely and create brave spaces to unearth what those things are, because we need everyone's voice. But I am still proud of the way Beverly has responded in this last incident, and I do believe that we're making good progress in ensuring that we continue to have a welcoming space for everyone.
Yeah, so I think we have one more question.
I apologize. I know we're short on time, but I just had to say something in regards to that as well, just real quick. I just wanted to say, kind of on the back end of that sentiment, if you don't have a positive and productive arena for those things to come out, for different views, they will come out in destructive ways. because there are people who feel that way, and there's more than just a couple that feel that way, which is fine. But again, it's still up to us to be able to provide some sort of form, or when it does come out, be okay in how we address it moving forward in a positive manner. People feel different ways, that's fine. You hope we're bringing it out in a more positive manner, but even if they don't, I'd rather them bring it out than hold it in, and then other people who feel the same way gather, and now it's a destructive force. Thank you.
If you will bear with us for just a few more minutes, I'd like to give an opportunity to ask the final question. We'll have one panelist respond, and then we're going to close the session. It's not the end of this conversation because this is a part of a series that will be standing up throughout the course of the year. But I'm going to ask our panelists, if your time allows, if you will remain for just a few more minutes afterwards, for those who might have some individual questions for you that they can talk with you one-on-one about.
Thanks so much. My name is Patty Lynch. I appreciate everybody's participation tonight. And part one of my question was already answered. Thank you, Dr. McKenzie, about how the community can continue supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion work citywide. And I appreciate a lot of the conversation around sort of cultural shifts and examining where in our culture we're not making space for others. And I'm curious specifically within the school, I heard a lot about policy in terms of like hiring, more diversely. And I'm wondering about the space for self-reflection on where the community of teachers, of administration, of staff is where those patterns exist that may create an environment where people don't want to be. So we may search for the best, increase our diversity, but if they come and it doesn't feel like a safe space because those patterns are so ingrained. So I'm just wondering if that is part of the thinking already. And I'm clear to somebody who's connected with the schools. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think one thing that, and I appreciate Dr. McKenzie pointing out, is that we do acknowledge that not only do we have some challenges in attracting diverse staff, but we also need to really work on retaining diverse staff when we get it. And to that point, we work to put together an affinity group for educators of color on the North Shore. It's an opportunity for us to give space and opportunity in a more protected environment for people to express sort of what they're dealing with and what they're feeling. But I also think that one of the opportunities that we have, and we just mentioned it yesterday, doing it again, back late January or mid-January, after the nation had, experienced some significant uprisings, and we put together an opportunity. It was just an open forum, and we said, if you're feeling like you have questions, if you're feeling like you
I want to thank everyone on behalf of myself, Dr. Morgan, and our panel for coming out tonight. This has been a great opportunity to have this open conversation with you all. Again, as Dr. Morgan mentioned, this is not the last. We are going to have several more of these conversations. I think as you all see, it's necessary, and it's important for us to continue to build our understanding of each other and where we are here together in Beverly. Look for more information to come, and if no one else has anything, you want to add anything, sir? We are thankful, and we will see you all next time. Go Red Sox. Again, if anyone has any individual questions or comments or wants to have a discussion with anyone on the panel, please feel free to stick around for a little bit. Otherwise, we will see you next time. Thank you.